Welcome to the Cloudless Mind podcast about neuroscience, non-duality, and change management. Introducing your hosts, Paul Smith and Scott Bird.
Welcome to the very first edition of the Cloudless Mind podcast. We are in different parts of the world. Myself, Scott Bird, and Paul Smith are sitting on different sides of the Atlantic right now. So this new relationship that you and I have had, which is more of a long-distance relationship, has had me to have to really learn a lot of this amazing technology that allows this to happen seamlessly. So it's exciting.
This is actually never how I frame it. Like Scott and I, we have a long-distance relationship. But
Well, why don't we, for those listening, do a little, background from each of us, and then we'll get into, the purpose and a couple of things that we have going on, and just see where it goes from there. So, Paul, why don't you start? Give a little summary of your world, and then I'll go after that.
Yes. So I'm Paul from the Netherlands. I am an author and a speaker and a comedian. So that's what I do for a living. And I started a company with you about half a year ago, Pathways Global. And it's been a lot of fun so far already, I have to say. So, but tell me something about your background, Scott.
For the majority of my career, I worked in the investment bank world and in asset management firms, a couple of large international asset management firms based in the U.S. At 40 years old, I decided that time in my life had played itself out. And so on my 40th birthday, I walked away from that world and really started to follow my passion, which had been started about a decade before in the world of coaching and the world of, just discovering what I don't know and living from a place of possibility and wonder. So from that, I developed a coaching practice. It was an incredible learning experience, and I think both of us are bringing all of our previous experiences to this new endeavor called Pathways Global.
Absolutely.
So just to start this first podcast, what was the common theme that had you and I come together? What would have two businessmen from across the country come together? So, Paul, why don't you take a couple of minutes and describe how you see this idea of non-duality, which is the binding force between you and me and our work?
I've met a lot of people busy with non-duality, but with you it was like, for me, fun and interesting that you're also in the business world.
Right.
Well, first of all, it says non-duality, so it points to the idea that it's not two, that everything is not two, and it points to the idea that everything is one. We could say everything is one energy. So everything is made out of the same stuff, and everything is simply happening. This means water simply flows. The wind simply blows, the bird simply flies, and we are simply recording a podcast. The difference is that we as human beings think that we as individuals are now choosing what we say, and that it's our decision to podcast, and that is you, that this is me, and that these are our words. But there's actually no difference between the wind blowing and us talking, because it's all energy at play. And here it becomes radical for most people, because you've been conditioned your whole life with the idea that this is me.
Right.
But non-duality points back to that idea of me is truly an idea that arises from the functionality of your brain.
Right.
So it looks like you are a person, and it even feels like you have free will. But if we look deeper, let's say in the Matrix we take the red pill, then we can see that is all an illusion.
Yeah, let me jump in there really quick, because I think you said something that is really important in this conversation, and it's this idea of looking deeper. See, for me, that's this idea of non-duality arose without really knowing anything about non-duality, like having the idea that there was this concept called non-duality. It arose for me during a a period of what I call really deep pain, where I saw things where I was almost forced to look at something in a different way.
Yeah.
I was forced to really look like, wait a minute, is what I'm thinking true? Is this really real, the way I've been operating and thinking through the world? So I think when you said that, when you're going to speak a little bit more about that, when you say you think deeper about things, what does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, most people start to look deeper after being in a crisis.
Yes.
So you've got people like filled with thoughts of worry, filled with stress, or having a burnout or whatever. And actually, this crisis is really useful because you have to look at yourself and the world differently to find a way out, So that's when people are like, start to question things like, okay, what are my thoughts? And already most people, they are so identified with their thoughts, they literally think that they are their thoughts, but also they think they produce their thoughts. And only this small idea already creates so much stress. I mean, we got between 30,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. I mean, imagine you would take them all seriously. that man, you will go mental.
Oh, well, and really, that's actually what happened for me at a given point, a little less than a decade ago, is that it was almost like my brain arced. I had become so identified with these thoughts that were consuming me. It for all intents and purposes kind of took me out. It took me out to where I wasn't functioning like I normally would. It was from that level that this possibility arose, and it was really real at the moment. It was like, wait a minute. And I'd never experienced something like that, sort of that shutting down of my old way of thinking and something new popping up, but I really didn't even know what that was. I think that's what you're speaking to.
Absolutely, because at a certain point, you become aware that you are not your thoughts. I mean, you can't be your thoughts because a thought comes and goes, but who is it that is looking at the thought?
And who is it that doesn't come and go? What is the one thing that has to be real almost? Is the thing that doesn't come and go, that has true permanence, which, people would term, consciousness or awareness or who you really are, which is the thing that's observing these thoughts.
Absolutely. So you're kind of like the empty space in which everything comes and goes. Or in the Advaita, the Indian philosophy, they say you are the white screen on which the movie is being projected. And everything in the projection comes and goes, but the white screen always stays untouched. And that exactly is the same as with our awareness. It is always stays untouched.
Yeah, that, and to further that analogy, I love that analogy, because if you consider yourself, let's say who you are is this old school kind of plasma screen back in the day, and the plasma had that material, and what happens with human beings is, who you really are is that blank, pristine screen. Yet what happens, if you remember in plasmas, if something stuck around for long enough on the screen, it would make an imprint on the screen. So you would be seeing it through that.
Yeah.
And and then over time, all these like fingerprints and all these different things that sort of stuck in your mind became the filter in which you saw the world through. So now, instead of it being this super clear type of space, in which life shows up, it's all seen through these images and this smudge and this what we'll call sludge on the screen, so nothing's clear. And ultimately, when that becomes so clouded with everything, you can't see anything. And I think what I was describing earlier is all of a sudden that screen kind of blew up for me.
Yeah.
And clarity arose for a very brief period of time back then. But that's a lot about what you're talking about, is that who you are is really this pristine screen, but it gets clouded up with all of these filters that we add since we're about 1.5 years old.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great analogy. I've never heard of that one. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, I love images, and a lot of our stuff is kind of neurologically focused. That's both of a big fascination for both of us. So yeah, we'll work to get some more analogies that work for us here. So we talked a little bit about how I discovered it, and I think it'd be interesting for those listening to have some context on how it arose for you? Like, what was the process that brought this into your life?
Well, I remember being 11 years old, and I took a small notebook and I wrote down the meaning of life.
Yeah.
And at that age, I was so determined to figure out, why do I live? Because what's the point of everything? And so I started searching, and during my teenage years, beginning 20s, I would be in the library all day, going through all the books and going from Eastern philosophy to any kind of religions and Egyptian philosophy, I remember. And eventually I graduated with an essay on the evolution of the human consciousness. But even then, I was like, I'm missing something. I'm overlooking something. I've always felt it, and I've always thought about that. The answer would come from India. And then it was so funny that I came across a book when I was 29 years old. The title translated from Dutch was "Who Seeks Shall Not Find." It was incredible. And I took the book. I remember reading it in Bath, and I just kept crying. I was like, "What is happening?" And at each page, it blew my mind. I was like, "This is amazing," and I couldn't totally get it yet.
Right.
But I could feel that this was what I've been looking for ever since I was 11 years old. And then later on, I found that this was a philosophy called Advaita, or non-duality, or solipsism. And then I just started digging into that big time.
We talked about earlier how transformation happens from different places. And from the place it came from for you, it was really evident. At 11 years old, a passion is already developed. It was almost in your DNA. So you didn't, like so many of us, have to go through the typical type of brain damage and stress and we'll call it urgency, or a huge blow up in our lives in order to get access. It came from that. Whereas I had another path to that through pain and suffering, and really a life lived sort of in the societal river, how the society takes you down, and in that river there's this low-level anxiety that's seemingly always present. So mine was born from having enough of that. Yours was born from a continued passion in the search that was just innate. So and we talk a lot about this, about when we'll get into later conversations around change and transformation. Both of these transformations happen to us from one of those places, from pain or passion.
Absolutely. Did waking up from that dream liberate you a bit?
So my crisis was a business crisis that happened out of the blue. My life was swimming along, most people would say, pretty impressively. Had a lot of the stuff that people aspire to, and I live in this beautiful paradise on the east coast of North America or of the United States, and so mine at the time, from this thing, that a number of things that happened created this enormous amount of pain. And then, so almost anything at that point, anything that would give me relief from that was going to be, welcomed. But I'll never forget when I had my first experience of this idea that we'll be speaking about and what we've built the business around, that it stopped everything. All my thinking stopped. There was no thinking. There was just what was happening at the moment, but without judgment, without anything. There was like an opening, this portal that opened. And I can't. There's really no words to explain it, and it didn't last that long. It was only it could have only just been a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
But from that couple of seconds, there was like a feeling and an understanding that came over me that has never left. It was instant. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't experience more. There was still momentum with my brain in terms of what was going on in my life and all the stuff at that different time. There was still momentum, and that would still play itself out. But always behind it was this new understanding that didn't exist before.
These short experiences where you we could even say realize your true nature. That's so important because there's the first recognition about the total difference between being identified with your body, thoughts, and feelings to being identified with the stillness you are. That gives so much clarity. I've had one, I remember I brought my car to the garage and I had to walk home, and I walked along a busy road, and suddenly something changed, and I looked at the world and I was like, oh my God, it's just appearing. And you can't describe these things in words, but it's such an opening suddenly, like, oh, wait a minute, there's a whole different world beyond this. And to me, that was fascinating.
Yeah, it was almost like if you take, do you have Etch-a-Sketches over there in Holland? You know, it was almost like that, or Etch-a-Sketch, or that plasma screen that we talked about before, got wiped completely clean, like perfectly clean, where nothing was there. All of my different preferences, my different desires and wants and needs and all that just completely disappeared. None of that brain trash was there for an instant. What ended up happening was it became sort of the guiding force between as I progressed through my crisis and made decisions, and I could make decisions, had a different flavor to them because of this realization. So when you have that experience, you really want to tell people about it. And I know we'll go into this process over time.
You will become so annoying after that, because I was at every birthday party telling people that, who are you? Did you just choose to buy that Coke? Or was the decision made in your unconscious brain? And people are like, what are you talking about, you idiot?
Well, and that, I mean, I experienced the same thing. It was almost like an arrogance around it, which needed to, apparently that needed to burn off over time before it's really sunk in.
Yeah, I think it's cool in another podcast if we go through stages you go through while waking up, because that's such a fascinating process, you know.
Yeah,
and of course there's not a typical route for everyone, but there are a lot of similarities in that process. So we'll go into that.
And you and I have talked a lot about this. I think, you know, because my experience is it's very common. Everybody kind of runs through the same gamut with that. So I tell you, that's probably a good place for us to end this first podcast today. We've really enjoyed this. I'll tell you, in the meantime, if you would like to find out more about what we're up to, we just released a book called A Cloudless Mind, which you can find on Amazon. And if you want to go further, there is our website, cloudlessmind.com, and you can get some more information there. And
see you next time.